back to the channel, everybody. So in Game 6, the Timberwolves won in dominating fashion over the Denver Nuggets and forced maybe the biggest Game 7 we've seen in recent years. A lot of people think these are the two best teams in the NBA. Obviously you have the Boston Celtics out east, but considering their situation with Kristaps Porzingis right now and that he's supposed to miss the first two games of the Eastern Conference Finals, you can't guarantee that he's going to be back at any point. Plus, Boston's done this in recent years where they've looked like a great team but have come up short either in the Eastern Conference Finals or that year they made the NBA Finals against Golden State. Who knows, maybe Boston, this is finally their year, but if it's not going to be them, it's probably going to be the winner of this Denver-Minnesota series. And who knows, crazy things happen in the NBA all the time, so Dallas, Oklahoma City, or the Knicks, one of those teams, could end up winning the title as well, but most likely you have one game in the second round of the playoffs that will decide who wins an NBA title. Most of the time, the biggest factor in Game 7s is who has home court, and the Nuggets doing this series being the 2 seed, they have that great home crowd and usually have the advantage of elevation playing out for them. But surprisingly in this series, road teams have won 4 of the 6 games. So Minnesota knows that they can come into Denver and win a tough playoff game. It's hard to look at the previous games of this series to decide who's going to win Game 7 just based off how many crazy swings of momentum there have been so far. You had those first 2 games where the Timberwolves won in dominating fashion. Game 1, Anthony Edwards scored 43 points and everyone was coming out with the Michael Jordan comparisons. Game 2, Minnesota would have one of the best defensive performances in recent playoff history. They completely swallowed up Jamal Murray and they made Jokic look human for the first time in a few years. Right after this game, Jokic was awarded the MVP, and this was met with a lot of criticism from a lot of people in the media. Obviously, it's not good timing for him to get the MVP right after having one of his worst playoff games, and people were jumping on it saying he didn't deserve to win 3 MVPs in 4 years, and people were actually questioning the Nuggets championship from last year, saying they played a bunch of lower seeded teams like the Lakers and the Heat, and they didn't really deserve the championship because they didn't go through tough teams to win it. I think this is a ridiculous argument to make. You hear people make this about pretty much every championship, whether a star player was hurt on another team, you heard it with the Lakers during COVID. Everyone's always going to find an excuse to say a championship is illegitimate. But after an embarrassing Game 2, the Nuggets would bounce back. They would win both games in Minnesota, tying up the series 2-2, setting up the stage for a pivotal Game 5. In this Game 5, Jokic probably had the best game of his career. He scored 40 points, had 13 assists, and was able to edge out Anthony Edwards, who had a great game on the other side. Honestly, Jokic really needed this game for his legacy. He's heading up there in terms of the all-time greats and what he's done throughout his career, but he really hasn't had that signature moment in a game or a series where his back is up against the wall. Last year, things came pretty easy. He did have some tough moments against the Lakers, but that series ended up being a sweep, and then they beat a number 8 seed team, the Miami Heat, in the NBA Finals in 5 games. So there wasn't a whole lot of adversity or pressure that he faced last year. But being down 2-0 and having a Game 5 in a 2-2 series and showing up, having 14 points, 13 assists, no turnovers, it definitely set the stage as his biggest game of his career so far. Of all the great LeBron moments that he's had throughout his career, I always think back to 2012, that Game 6 in the Eastern Conference Finals against Boston. At this point, LeBron hadn't won any titles. He was coming off the meltdown last year. He was facing probably the most criticism he's faced in his career for not winning a title yet, and he goes off in that Game 6 in Boston, scoring 40 plus, just being absolutely dominant in a must-win game with his back up against the wall. Wasn't exactly the same stakes as Jokic. They did have the series tied at that point. They weren't down, but he stepped up in a big stage and showed that he is the best player in the NBA, and you can trust him when adversity comes. After Jokic wowed everyone in Game 5, a lot of people thought the series was over. I probably got fooled again by this. After 2 games, I thought the Timberwolves had it. After 5 games, I thought the Nuggets had it. But the Timberwolves would answer back in Game 6, absolutely destroying Denver, winning the game by 45 points. If you're on the Timberwolves side of things, one big reason for this Game 6 turnaround is they had Mike Conley back. And even though he was there in Games 3 or 4 when they lost, not having him in Game 5 was huge. is he's not going to be a big time scorer or big time playmaker, but he does help calm everything down out there and make sure everyone's in the right position, make sure the right guys are getting touches at the right moments to keep the offense flowing nicely. Now talking about Denver's point guard, Jamal Murray has been pretty bad in this series. I know he's dealing with some injuries, so you gotta appreciate the guy going out there and playing through it, as lots of guys are this time of year, but he's only scored 20 points one time in this series. There is that controversy too that he probably should have been suspended in Game 3 after what he did in Game 2, throwing a heat pack out onto the court, and who knows, that could have drastically changed the outlook of this year if Murray did get suspended and the Timberwolves ended up winning that game. There's so many things to factor in when looking into this Game 7, trying to decide who's going to win. If I had to narrow it down to one thing, I would say you got the defending champs at home, and that's enough to give them the edge in this one. I would probably lean Denver, but like I said, I've been wrong about this series too many times now, so I would definitely not be surprised if Minnesota was able to pull it off. Hopefully it ends up being a great game, as I'm sure lots of NBA fans will be watching. So far in this series, we really haven't had that super close game that comes down to the wire yet. Maybe it will set up everything for a classic Game 7. But more than just having a good game to watch, this game's going to have a huge impact on the rest of the NBA playoffs and the NBA moving forward. If the Timberwolves are able to pull off the upset, now you have Anthony Edwards as a bona fide superstar. He's probably the best American player out there if he wins this series. And you can look at maybe potentially having him win his first title. Karl-Anthony Towns finally fulfilling his potential as a former number 1 pick. The Rudy Gobert trade actually paying off for the Timberwolves. But then if they end up losing this, then you still have Anthony Edwards, this guy who was getting these Michael Jordan comparisons and getting so much praise as someone that still hasn't made the Western Conference Finals yet and has only won one playoff series in his career. Gobert and Towns have both been criticized for their play throughout this series, and if one of them were to have a bad game in this pivotal Game 7, you definitely are going to hear a lot more criticism about them. There's been even potential Karl-Anthony Towns trade rumors, and Rudy Gobert is probably not getting traded. I don't think there's a huge market for him, but people have talked whether Towns is the right star to pair alongside Edwards. Now, if the Nuggets win this game and move on to the Western Conference Finals, they should be considered the favorites going forward. They won it last year and would have a good chance at going back-to-back, and this would obviously be huge for Jokic and his legacy. Jokic is only in his 9th season, so it's a little early to start thinking about his career outlook and how he stacks up against the greats of all time. I kind of see 3 different paths for Jokic heading forward from this point. I think the worst career trajectory for Jokic is kind of where Giannis Antetokounmpo is at right now. And I say right now because obviously Giannis can still build on his resume. I'm pretty sure he's actually younger than Jokic, so we'll see what he ends up doing. But with Giannis, he won that one title in 2021. After this, everyone was saying he was the best player in the world, similar to Jokic in 2023 when he won his first title. The following year for Giannis though, he was still awesome in the playoffs, but ended up losing Game 7 in the second round to Boston. So if Jokic comes out, he had an awesome game series in the second round, but if he loses in Game 7, then we may say, oh, he'll be back in the future like we thought with Giannis, but you never know how the team's going to go. Giannis has had some bad injury luck in the last couple postseasons. Hopefully that doesn't happen to Jokic, as he seems to almost pretty much never get hurt. But you could see that if the team breaks down around him, you look at this Nuggets team and they have paid a lot of money to guys like Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. If those guys aren't stepping up in future postseasons, you could see the team kind of let Jokic down the way the Bucks have kind of let Giannis down in recent years. I think kind of the middle path in terms of career outlook for Jokic looks something like Hakeem Olajuwon, and that would involve them winning this series against the Timberwolves and potentially winning the NBA title this year. Hakeem went back-to-back in 94-95 in between Jordan's 2 three-peats, and if Jokic was able to win back-to-back titles last year and this year, it would put him on a similar outlook as a former MVP that led a team without a whole lot of great players around him. If you look at Hakeem Olajuwon in that 94 season, he had maybe Otis Thorpe, Kenny Smith, not a whole lot of great guys on that team. And one of the things that Jokic fans have always said is that he doesn't play alongside an all-star. That's a little bit unfair because Jamal Murray is definitely at that all-star caliber, just hasn't received that recognition yet. but they are right that Jokic hasn't had a lot of help in terms of playing with all-star teammates. If you're looking at the greatest outlook for Jokic's career, I'd say it's probably someone like Tim Duncan. Now, obviously this is a little ambitious, as Tim Duncan won 5 titles and is one of the 10 greatest players of all time. Duncan started winning his championship super young as well, winning one in his second season, while obviously it took Jokic a lot longer, getting his first one last year. The only reason I suggest this is the Nuggets have built a great culture, kind of similar to what the Spurs had in the 2000s and early 2010s. Jokic sets it by example, being an unselfish player, getting his teammates to do better and be more unselfish, like Aaron Gordon, vastly improving his game once he got to play alongside Jokic. Other than Jokic trying to prove himself as one of the all-time greats, this game could be very impactful for the outlook of the Nuggets moving forward. In the 2020s so far, we've seen 4 different teams win a championship, with the Lakers, Bucks, Warriors, and Nuggets last year. It kind of seems like we're entering a decade more so like the 70s in NBA basketball, where you had a bunch of different teams having their 1 or 2 year run, as opposed to the 80s and 90s where you saw dynasties dominate the majority of the decade. The Nuggets have a chance to go back to back and stamp their mark as being the team that's going to dominate these 2020s. I'm 26 years old now, and I've been a basketball fan for about the past 20 years. Over that time, there's very few games I remember where you had to absolutely watch that game, as you knew it would have something crazy or a potential huge impact on the game of basketball. I remember like 2008 Celtics Lakers finals game, 2012 those Spurs Heat games, 2016 between the Warriors and the Cavs, and then maybe 2017, 2018, those first couple games of the series between the Warriors and the Cavs when they got the KD. But other than that, there haven't been any absolutely huge games that you knew you had to be there to watch in the second round of the playoffs like we have right now. No matter who wins, I'm sure it's going to have a huge impact on the rest of the playoffs, so let me know down in the comments who you think is going to win between the Timberwolves and the Nuggets in Game 7. Thanks for watching, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.